turn our attention now to some ornamental horticulture questions. And this is actually the section that we had the most questions submitted in. So we're going to take about 10 or 15 minutes here, address all that we can of those. And we've got Lee Rumble. He's going to help us answer some questions in this area. And Miss Taylor, is Taylor here? I
don't think so, Celeste. I didn't see her.
Okay, so Taylor, I'm in with this. That's okay. I'll help you out. We will get these questions answered. So let's just start at the top there. One of the first questions says, I bought a ginkgo tree a couple of years ago. It's about 5 feet tall, but hasn't grown very much. The ends of the leaves turn brown. When I think she means the edges of the leaves turn brown, and the leaves are small. What can I do to help it be healthy?
So first and foremost, ginkgo is actually a slow grower. So that's important to realize, over about a 10 to 12 year period, you're probably only going to see the growth rate at about a foot a year. So maybe 10 to 15 feet over 10 to 12 years. Ginkgos are pretty much pest and disease free. So my first thought would be, I would want to check planting depth. That is one thing I always look at as an arborist. I want to make sure there's a prominent root flare, make sure that crown is above the soil line. I would also investigate, the planting hole. I would want to make sure it was planted properly. Now, you may not have planted the tree, but if a landscaper had, I would want to confirm that balled and burlap sack was removed, the wires, any straps or banding. And oftentimes we associate, leaf browning could be a result of watering. Now, I'm not sure which part of the state this question came from, Celeste, but, here in Knoxville, we had a dry June. I will agree with that. We had about 1.8 inches, but every month prior to that, we've been close to about 5 inches a month. So I really don't suspect it to be watering, although it could be. June was a little hard here in East Tennessee, but the best thing that I would suggest, is kind of mimic what we see in a forest stand. Why is it our forest trees never get supplemental water? They never get fertilizer. They never get pruned. They manage their own diseases and insects very well. And the answer is usually because they have, a real nice layer of mulch. They've got 10 inches of duff there, sticks, twigs, decaying, fungi, bacteria, and vertebrates in the soil, creating a really wonderfully active soil. So, I would encourage mulches, ideally all the way out to the drip line. So extending that drip line as far as you can with mulch. I know sometimes that's a challenge because people do love their turf grass, but trees and turf really are kind of in competition with one another. Now, we can make them coexist, but I would investigate planting depth first, Celeste. That's my first thought. And I will tell you, I have transplanted ginkgos, and for some reason, they really enjoy a little bit of root disturbance. So if you notice that the tree is too deep in the ground, go ahead and dig it up. A lot of times they'll have really vigorous growth after some of those roots are damaged from the transplanting process. And I've seen ginkgos literally take off after being planted from a transplant. So
that's awesome. I had no idea that they would respond like that. That's cool.
Absolutely.
I actually had a black gum in our landscape that was showing some of those same stressor symptoms with the edges, kind of turning brown, getting crispy. And my husband planted that tree for me. And I went out there and examined it upon closer inspection. It's been there about almost 2 years now. And it was a little deep. And I think we need to probably lift it as well. So
that's probably my first thought. Again, there's really no insect pest of ginkgo. There's a couple leaf spots, but that wouldn't coalesce and turn into the entire, tip or the margins of that leaf turning brown. So check the planting depth first. Go from there.
Good recommendations. I love this next question because I feel like we get it a lot, even at the county level. How do I go about finding the right landscaping company for my landscaping needs? And does UT provide any recommendations? So that one's kind of tricky. We try not to give specific recommendations. We don't want to, be favoring one commercial company over another, but we can promote people who have special training, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, Celeste, it is. So my role with UT Extension is actually in commercial horticulture. So I work primarily with, the professional growers, the landscapers here in the county, and arborists as well. So as Celeste mentioned, we want to look for credentials and those that are implementing best management practices into the landscape. Certainly, we do give recommendations, but as Celeste said, it's not one individual company. We'll offer 3 or 4. I always tell people, compare apples to apples on bids, get clarification on bids. If it just says prune tree, what does that mean? Prune's a very arbitrary word. Fertilize is a very arbitrary word as well, so check with those landscapers. Follow up with secondary questions. I tell people a lot of times reach out to your county agent and get clarification from them if need be. What do they mean by something they've written? But really look for those that have credentials. Some of those good credentials to look for, at least with regards to arboriculture, is the ISA, International Society of Arboriculture, for certified arborists. The Tree Care Industry Association for tree guys as well. For landscapers, we generally, ideally we want to work some with, those that have been members of the Better Business Bureau or maybe the Chamber of Commerce, have been in the community for a while. But really it's kind of doing your own homework too, don't just take, don't take everything at face value, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So read a publication, ask for a publication. Ask if, do you need to be applying lime? If you haven't even done a soil test or your landscape company hasn't done a soil test, well, let's not put lime out every single year just because it's part of the project, So that would be my thought there. And then again, we do offer, multiple recommendations, not just one company. So
Excellent. Good to know. All right. So this one was interesting, Lee. I know that you have had this question before. So it's dealing with arborvitaes. This is evergreen for those who aren't familiar, that are browning on one side only. And I feel like people struggle with browning on evergreens a lot, whether it's, restricted to one side or if it's distributed throughout the canopy or from the bottom up, and all of these things can tell us, can point us towards different directions of what is causing those types of issues.
that's
And I think
exactly right.
in this particular situation, the side where they're having browning is like next to a patio where there's been some construction, and some different things have been added or changed. Would you like to tell us what your thoughts might be?
Of course. So, this was an interesting question, and I was able to see this one first. And there are, as you mentioned, a lot of things going on in this situation. So there was basically a pad that was already established, a patio area, that they had someone come in, remove that pad, expand that pad, and then they put in a covered awning. So a couple of things going on there. Number one, we certainly would have root disturbance on particularly that side of the arborvitae. We think about, bobcats coming in or excavators coming in and digging through roots. And a lot of times if the small absorbing roots are damaged, it's not the end of the world, but the closer you get to that plant, the larger the root you're going to be cutting. So that would be my first thought, is a little bit of damage of the root system, and even compaction of the soil right there in that area as well can be problematic. The next thought would be, of course, they did cover that patio. So now we suddenly get, 100% shade on one side of that arborvitae. Now, arborvitaes really, and most evergreens want, a minimum of 6 hours of sun a day. 8 is certainly preferred. So really use caution when you make changes, to the landscape. Now, the fact that they're browning primarily on one side really leads me to believe this is more an issue of, the actual damage to the root system. But arborvitaes oftentimes will brown too as a result of winter desiccation. So if we don't think to water our plants oftentimes in the winter, but if we have a very cold winter and we have a lot of air moving through our arborvitaes, we can get desiccation of those tips and you'll see needle browning. We also have one pest of arborvitae that can lead to tip browning as well, and that's arborvitae leaf miner. We'll see those moths around May. They'll lay eggs. Those larvae will actually tunnel into the tips. If you ever flip those tips over, you can notice perfectly symmetrical holes where, pupation has occurred and they'll emerge come May. So that can be an issue as well. The biggest thought is, I know that in this question, they had mentioned that the other side was still lovely and lush green was the wording I saw. And, that probably is a direct result of there being sufficient sunlight on that side. And we know that arborvitaes, again, they will thin out, they'll get leggy if they get into a dense shade situation. So, but, I want everyone to really remember one thing, it's never one factor that kills a tree, or I should say it's rarely one factor that's going to kill a tree or a large shrub. It's this culmination of factors that build up over time. Maybe the plant wasn't planted appropriately when you purchased it at the nursery, you brought it home, maybe you planted it a little deep or it settled some more. Maybe we get a drought, one year, maybe there's a couple arborvitae leaf minor feeding, then we come in and we do some construction. So it's really this stress complex that ultimately leads to the decline of our woody ornamentals. So always encourage people to focus early, start early, structure prune them, put them where you're going to leave them alone, get them in an established bed, and leave them alone from there.
And in this particular situation, if the other side is nice and lush and thriving, and it sounds like it's providing quite a bit of privacy for this, personal space in their landscape, I say let's just embrace that. Like the sides that are brown, even if things were corrected and more sun was allowed in, those are never going to flush back out. So I would just say go ahead and prune off all that dead, maybe string up some little string lights in there and make it a nice little escape getaway.
I
And
like it.
let the outside world see the green, and then you get to have the twinkles.
I like it. Or even plant in between if that's an option as well. You could have a filler on the back. But Celeste brings up a good point. With our evergreens, those buds develop on the ends of the needles only. So if we ever shear or we cut those tips off, we're not going to see emergence of new buds deeper back in that canopy. So as Celeste said, go ahead and cull those limbs. It might look a little bit unsightly and you're not going to have a whole lot of new growth, but by removing those, you actually open up pockets where new sunlight can occur, and some of the live foliage will, of course, try and capitalize on that. And, in a situation where you don't have shade on the backside, a tree could fill itself back in, particularly in arborvitae.
Okay, well, I think we've got time enough to address one more question. So like I said, there were several that didn't have time to present today. We'll try to get those answered maybe through UT Hort on Facebook at some point in the future. But this one for sure I want to address because I know it is prominent right now. Been having tons of calls about bagworms, predominantly on, evergreen type plants. And by the time we notice them, right, they're in their bags, they're hanging, they're stationary. Right. They're not actively feeding at that point. We don't usually even notice the damage while they're feeding, which is the opportune time to treat them.
That's right.
We don't see the damage until now. And so people want to take action, but we've missed the window, really.
We have. You're exactly right, Celeste. For us here, usually you want to be looking out and start scouting by April and May. That's when you're best going to control that. Those eggs are hatching during this period. That's when you should be scouting. And that's when the most effective treatments can actually be made. At this time of year, any spray is, as you've already mentioned, they're sheltered in the bag itself. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything. You can go out and mechanically move those bagworms. Exactly. You got it.
Get your painters out.
That's exactly right. And you can do that now, certainly into the winter. And what that will do is, of course, reduce the number of pests that you're going to see in that plant come spring. So I really am a big advocate of pulling those bags off of there, disposing of those. And that will, again, really reduce the number of emergents that you'll see come spring. So,
and those bags are water repellent. So I just want to caution people, landscape sometimes landscape managers will, feel the urge to need to treat that for you because they're there, you can see them. But just know that the best route would be mechanical removal at this point, and then have your landscape managers scout early in mid-spring and apply control measures June, May, June, early July.
That's exactly right.
Save that money right now. You don't have to spend that money now, and just
Yeah.
have them monitor it for next season.
And the same, I might go ahead and mention too, Celeste, is true for many of our fungal issues that we see on our ornamentals. Don't start spraying, in August and September. That's really more of a preventative issue. We see shot hole on laurels all the time. We see scale on magnolia, and this is just not the time. They're already protected. The scale insects have developed that waxy cuticle, so you can spray all day long and you're just not doing much. So scout early and then start your control.
All
Avoid
right.
the revenge sprays.
The
Yeah.
revenge sprays.
All right. Well, I think that that kind of wraps things up for today. We're getting to the end of our session. And again, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. We've had great attendance. I hope y'all have learned a lot and had an opportunity to get lots of your questions answered. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for jumping in and answering those question and answers that were coming in live, and also for posting all those awesome links to publications that we were mentioning as we went through the talk. Be sure, I hope that you all were able to save the ones that interested you the most so that you can have those for later reference. But if you didn't, always know that you can go to uthort.com. It's got it's a searchable engine. So you just go to the search box up there in the top, and you should be able to find near about everything that we discussed today there on that site. All right. Well, that's all we have for y'all today, and we hope that you come back. We've got one more of these scheduled for the year. I think that happens. Oh my goodness, I can't remember the date. I think it happens in November. So we will hopefully see you then, and we'll be in communication with y'all. Thanks.
November 4th.
November 4th. Good deal.
See y'all.
See y'all.
Bye.